Easy Rider suddenly was a big hit. Everybody said, wait a second. Maybe these guys know something that we don't know.
Schneider, if you made a deal with him, he let you make your movie. He said, get out of my eyes. I'd come in and I'd say, boy, you got to see these rushes. Today's rushes were so great. And he said, get out of my office. I don't want to see any rushes. When you get your first cut, I'll look at the film. So it was a wonderful place to work. Later became known as BBS, Bert, Bob, and Steve, which is Steve Blauner, Bob Rafelson, and Bert Schneider.
BBS was very independent. They had a deal with Columbia, and they could make whatever they wanted up to a certain price. And this was as a result of the tremendous success of Easy Rider, which had been made possible by the Wild Angels. So it was kind of interesting how that all turned around. And then they made another movie called 5 Easy Pieces, which was another very big success.
Easy Rider was the turning point, not because it was the first unconventional movie, but because it was the first one that had some kind of financial success. And so Easy Rider was the reason that I was able to make Two-Lane Blacktop.
The thing about Easy Rider, which I remember really clearly, was that everybody said, oh, if you can make a movie for under $1 million, which at the time was unheard of, and make it do $100 million, then maybe every movie ought to be made for $1 million.
And so we had a guy called Freddie Weintraub, and people would come in off the street to deliver pizza, and he would think they were there to pitch a movie, and he'd say, if you can do it for under 300, go ahead.
Well, I mean, suddenly they thought everybody could ride a bicycle and deliver a script was certainly a candidate for being a director at that point. Since I had directed, it must mean anybody can direct. So
the studios were at a loss, and they had no mechanism to deal with this. And so they were more or less at the mercy of artists.
The dinosaurs had held on to the industry so tightly for so long that, very honestly, it was time for new blood to get in there and be able to go on and make some films.
And now, right around that period, was really where the kind of the new Hollywood started to take over.
We'd already had this revolution in cinema in Britain in the 60s. And then it was much more, ours was much more to do with class. And I'm talking about Tony Richardson, Lindsay Anderson, Carol Rice, and John Schlesinger. I think it's curious about John Schlesinger that he then went on to make what I think is an archetypal American 70s film, which is Midnight Cowboy, which has all the ingredients of North American 70s filmmaking. It's got sex, drugs, anti-authoritarianism, and the great quest for freedom, which was a theme through many of the films, the quest for some mythical freedom, as well as being a brilliant critique of the sadness and injustice of a marginalized American society.
John Schlesinger. He was a documentarian before he became a filmmaker with theatrical films, and that all had to do with the specifics, the taste of things, the real props, the real environment, and his eye was schooled to all those realities. And when we would walk in the streets and stuff like that, he would make notes, mental notes of what he saw. He encouraged improvisation as well, but not undisciplined improvisation toward the script.
Films that featured bad behavior, nudity, and bad language, films that were assaultive, were seen to be important and necessary to deal with the huge social confusion that was going on.
In May of 1970, the Hardhats down on Wall Street had a battle with the war protesters and beat them up. And the newspapers coined the term hard hat. The picture Joe opened in July of that year, so it caught all of that headline material magically, as it were. There was silence, and but that was the effect that we were going for.
The whole concept of movies is to be liked and make money, and often movies are there saying, "We don't care if you like us, we don't like you," and they're still making money. How do you figure that? Because of the unsettled times. These kind of movies sort of made sense of it. These were just nose-thumbing movies. They are there to thumb their nose at your values.
20 motherfuckers being much more dramatic than 40 motherfuckers. I said, yeah, David, they would, but the fact of the matter is that that's assuming that swearing is a substitute for action, in the sense that it's the equivalent of action. The swearing in this movie is a substitute for action because it's an expression of their impotence. They're not going to do anything but swear.
One of the main things films were trying to do was to reflect life as it was, rather than as authorities wanted it to be, which is what's happening now. Life is being reflected as the status quo wants it to be. And that is nice for people because they're not disturbed, but it isn't life as it is. And I think that the way the drugs were shown in these films, definitely, it wasn't a hypocritical era.
And Al had not done anything before, so we were able to stay together a month and a half before, just hanging out. It's a relentless film, but I think it's necessary to do films like that. You know, I mean, because before that, what did we see about drugs? The Man with the Golden Arm, which was a Hollywood version of it. I think my early films are people that are just on the outside, you know, they're just marginal people. And I guess I'm in sympathy with that.
My age group, and that was Billy Friedkin, who had done some incredible documentaries, one of which actually got a condemned killer off. I thought, my God, that's the ultimate dream of cinema, to have positive effect on life, you know. Instead of just being relegated to be this little kind of canary in a cage, being entertainment.
I could see when Phil D'Antoni, the producer, brought me this idea, I could see that I could induce the documentary style into this story. I would talk to the lighting cameraman, Owen Roisman, and give him a general area of where the action was going to take place. I would talk separately to the operating cameraman, who was a guy named Ricky Bravo, who was a Cuban exile who actually photographed the Cuban Revolution at Castro's side. And so I'd set up a scene with the actors, but I wouldn't show it. And I would then put Ricky in the room with a camera, and it was up to him to find the action. I'd say, a guy's going to be running down the street over there. And Ricky would say in his broken English, okay, I use a wheelchair? Yeah, we'll put him in a wheelchair and wheel him along. We never laid dolly tracks down. A lot of the stuff in the chase was an accident, was never planned. There wasn't supposed to be any crashes in that chase. They were all supposed to be near misses. There was no optical effects or anything. It was all done the way you saw it, and the camera captured it as best it could on the run.
I went to see it on 86th Street, which is sort of like the middle ground between black New York and white New York. And when Gene Hackman and I come out of the police station, and I'm pissing and moaning about my wounded hand, and he says,
"You dumb guinea. How the hell did I know he had a knife? Never trust a nigger."
The audience applauded, which is mostly a black audience. They applauded. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is what they knew Whitey was thinking anyway, and now somebody has finally said it in a movie.
There's another film that has a very similar theme and character to The French Connection that came out around the same time, and that was Dirty Harry.
Some critics thought it was a big statement on society at the time, or it was the bad thing to show, or because of the sort of vigilante kind of attitude towards the protagonist. It was bold in that era because everybody was being very cautious, and we sort of threw caution to the wind and went for it. And I think you've got to take chances. If you're afraid to take chances, then you can be kind of a middle of the road kind of deal. Pauline Kael called it a fascist masterpiece or something like that, and I said, great, terrific. You can call it anything you want. I'm glad you saw it.
Clint was a contract guy at Universal, not happy about it, went to Italy, did some startling new kinds of Westerns. And then when we got him to do Dirty Harry, he was truly empowered. So he ran the show, and he ran it with a very refined sensibility. And from a base of of frustration that came from being a contract guy and told to go out there and do this and do that. So it was thrilling to have somebody come in the room that wanted to make it his way. In fact, wouldn't do it any other way. And I liked that. I don't mean irresponsibly in the sense that anybody that's outrageous and impossible to work with is somebody I want to work with. I wasn't that masochistic. But I didn't want it filtered, in my case at least, I didn't want it filtered through the sensibility of a producer who was just putting deals together, as I had been in a previous lifetime.
It would have been very difficult to put over, even get made, a lot of the films of the 70s if it wasn't for a prevalent attitude in the country that was receptive to this cynicism, irony. Bogdanovich's work, The Last Picture Show, was a new way of seeing, based very much on older forms, because Peter was highly influenced by the earlier Hollywood, but he managed to make his films with a more contemporary sensibility.
It's been said that The Last Picture Show has a European feeling to it. But I don't think that was because of the filmmakers so much as it was the fact that I was a stranger to Texas. That to me, it was like a foreign country.
I took pictures of the town in color, and they didn't look at all like the town that we had discovered, which we found it at magic hour. And the wind was blowing, and there was dust, and it was dark and gloomy. The day I took the pictures, it was a beautiful, sunny day with blue sky. And I started saying to Peter, and the buildings were all red brick, and I started saying to Peter, blue and red, you know, maybe I could paint the whole town gray. You know, I had all these odd ideas of what to do. And Orson Welles, who was our friend, said, of course you'll make it in black and white. And Larry McMurtry, who wrote the book, said, black and white is the only way to do it. And so we had all these brilliant people to whom we listened.
To go with the sex, to go with the stuff that a studio normally would have asked you to soft pedal. It is more of that moment in American film when sort of you could get away with things. Suddenly you could do things that maybe you couldn't have done 5 years earlier at all.
The independent movement had grown and encroached upon the majors' territory. The majors not being dummies. As a matter of fact, as you know, the executives at the majors generally are pretty smart. So they took variation on the old formula, if you can't beat them, join them, and they decided if they couldn't beat them, buy them out.
So there was a hole there that existed, a kind of time-space continuum warp hole that opened up for about 3-4 years. And a lot of people went into that and got their feet into the industry that way.